This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the platform that helps you build a beautiful website in a single day. What makes a meaningful life, or rather a meaningful anything? Why do some people find it effortless to play the piano every day, but when you do it, it's a painful slog? Or how can you pour hours of effort into a craft and then still struggle to enjoy it? Or why is it that even when our hobbies bring us joy, they can feel empty behind closed doors, as if they don't matter? All of these questions can be answered with the self-determination theory, which is an idea in psychology that explains why we do what we do, and also how to make it mean something to us. In other words, intrinsic motivation. The three pillars of this theory that keep you fulfilled are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And I want to go beyond just a theory and see how we can actually take these concepts and apply them to our hobbies and skills, so that we can have a deep sense of satisfaction as we live them out, the kind that fends off any fatigue and burnout we might experience. Your interests don't have to be this battle with energy and discipline and all this other crap you have to deal with. There is another way. The first pillar is autonomy, and this is the freedom to make your own decisions and to carve your own path. In my history class a few years ago, I studied South Africa and the history of apartheid. And of course, we learned how the Boers showed up, how they interacted with the natives, and how the British changed that relationship later on, all of these things. We then learned about the rise and the fall of apartheid, with all of the big names along the way, like Mandela, Tutu, and the ANC. I haven't revisited any of this stuff since my A-levels, but as I talk to you about it now, it's kind of exciting. And I'd be more than happy to jump into a few books about the subject, or even look at my old textbooks. So this all sounds good to me in the present, so why then did I find it boring in school sometimes? What changed between then and now? I think it was the lack of autonomy. And I'm willing to bet that you've felt something similar, this same struggle. Maybe what you used to find tedious in school is now something that you're more than happy to sit down and learn about. Autonomy is what separates this fidgety child in the past to the present you, the one with the intrinsic desire to sit down and learn. Back in school, I had no choice but to learn South African history. And sure, that's not too bad on its own, but I had to prepare for exams. I was given essays I didn't really want to do, and I had all this homework to finish later on. All of these things I didn't want to do. With each of these additions, your freedom in the learning is chipped away little by little. And soon enough, the end goal is completely out of your hands. You're no longer behind the wheel, and the decisions in what you learn are made by someone else. Once you lose that autonomy, it's easy to fall out of love with a subject, and it starts to feel more like work. School is an obvious example, but sometimes the lack of autonomy sucks away your motivation in ways that you can't even see. Sometimes something that looks like a reward or an incentive in that hobby is the danger itself. You see this especially when people make their hobbies a business and they monetize their interests. If someone's great at whittling, for example, they might think, okay, I should probably start selling my sculptures at the local market. And they start to do that. And, if they sell, they sell. If they don't, whatever. I'm having fun making these, and it's a nice little way to earn some extra money. But let's say the whistler starts to catch people's attention. He sells out his statues at the market, and he's thinking, okay, people like my stuff, so I'm going to upscale this business. I'm going to, make a store where people can buy these from. You can order them online. I'm going to increase the production. All of these things to earn more money. The money's looking good, but totally unaware to him, the craft he once loved is in danger. And it's because he's introduced now an external motivation. Every time he sits down to carve a new statue, it's no longer the process he's focused on, but the end reward, which is the possibility of a sale. Sure, his hobby is the exact same, but his motivation has moved elsewhere. It's now the success of the business, and not necessarily the whittling. The whittling might just be a tool to get there now. It's no guarantee, but there's a chance that he grows to dislike the hobby that he previously spent hours and hours doing for free, or at least it's snuffed out by the business half, and the creative side isn't really given the attention it once was. And I'm not saying here that moving the motivation to the business side is inherently bad, because it's not. Some people like that, and for some it's a necessary trade-off that they're willing to accept. Before the next approach for autonomy, I'd like to talk about Squarespace. It's a platform that lets me build the website I always dreamed of having, and because of the Fluid Engine Editor, which you're seeing in action right now, I can customize all of the details to my liking without having to learn web design from scratch. I love that Squarespace handles all of the technical stuff for me, so I'm free to focus on the creative side. For example, I know nothing about SEO, but Squarespace optimizes that for me in the background, so there's no need for me to worry. And when I found out I could directly embed my newsletter into the site, I was sold. Right now, my website is the home for my writing, but I know that Squarespace has payment tools and the ability to host products, so I'm excited to see what I could do with it in the future, maybe when it comes to business. So go to squarespace.com and you can use their free trial to design your own website And once you feel ready to launch it, you can then go to squarespace.com/Odysseus and use code Odysseus to get 10% off when you buy your first website or domain. So how else can you take control of your interests and hold on to your freedom? Well, it's important to point out one big source of manipulation, one that strips away your autonomy all while you don't realize it. I know this because I was a victim of it. For many years, I was being pulled on strings, and it all happened under my nose. And the culprit is social media. And the reason it's dangerous is because it can sabotage you before you've even started a new skill or a hobby. It can convince you to start something that you don't truly care about. And I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out, because I have a feeling you've been through something like that. If you scroll through YouTube or Instagram, you'll see people doing hundreds of different hobbies, crafts, and interests, all of them equally exciting and different to each other. You'll see people making mead, making cocktails, or creating these beautiful pencil drawings. You'll see bushcraft, coding, calisthenics, and everything in between. You see their end result of years, maybe decades of experience. And naturally, it's exciting, and you want to do the same thing as them. And that's good, but here's where the trouble is. Are you starting something new because you genuinely care about it? Or is it because there was this temporary burst of motivation from seeing it somewhere else? I'm not saying you won't enjoy it, but when we see a staged outcome, it's easy to fall in love with a hobby and fail to see it for what it truly is. It's not all fun and games, it's not all successes. It's tough, it's expensive, it's a huge time investment, and it's going to take many years to get to that level of expertise. But you don't see that on the other side of the screen. You only see the polished end result, one that probably took, again, years of experience to get to. For example, I released this video because I'm hoping that you're going to find something useful in it. But you don't see all the writing, all the editing, and all the technical crap. Because why would you? All of that stuff props up the end result, which is the only thing I want you to see. So am I saying this to demotivate you from trying new things? Of course not. Not in a million years. But it's simply a call to recognize where these desires come from. Do they come truly from within, or is it because you're being influenced from some external source? And by the way, that is easy to happen. It's happened to me a million times, and it's not like it's unexpected at all. You might discover that those interests are not truly for you. Maybe the process doesn't excite you and bring you joy, and it's not worth the end result. Or hell, maybe it is. Maybe you try something new and it sticks, and you do find this intrinsic motivation to then carry on. Autonomy is not just the ability to choose your own path, but to recognize that it comes from within and not someone else. But if we come back to the earlier question of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, you might be wondering, well, how do I know which is mine? How do I know what my relationship to the hobby is? Well, one great question I would ask for that is, would you still do this hobby if there was no external reward? And by that I mean, would you carry on with it if there was no money, no status or achievement waiting for you at the end? None of those external motivators are bad per se, but you may not want to depend upon them in your interests. So if you had all of the freedom in the world, would you still play the piano? Would you still go to kickboxing class? Or would you still code video games? And if the answer is yes to that, then there's a good chance that this activity is truly meaningful to you, and you have this intrinsic motivation to continue. I was tested with this question a few weeks ago. So for some context, a few months ago, my friend invited me to run the London Marathon. And almost impulsively, I said, screw it. And I signed up. Now, I'm not a runner. I'm the furthest thing from a runner. But I knew my cardio wasn't in great shape. And I thought, let this be the chance to improve it. It's going to be the push I need. When you sign up, you pay a fee, and then you get entered into a ballot. And only months later do you discover if you've got a place or not. Now, I didn't know if I had got in yet, but I also didn't want to save my training until it was too late. So I thought, let's start right away. And I got out the door. And those few runs were an experience, I can tell you that. During my first few 5Ks, I was thinking, how can someone enjoy this? How can you do this for fun? It was so bad that I thought I had asthma, but it turns out my cardio was just that bad. But as time went on, I started to get a little bit better, and it was less painful. It was still painful, it was still horrible, but it was at least satisfying to finish the run and, feel tired afterwards. But with every good news comes something bad. And I found out just a few weeks ago that I didn't get into next year's London Marathon. And that's still months after I started training. So then a question came to me, what do I do now? Do I just stop running? Do I carry on? Is there a point of me doing this? Within a single email, my external source of motivation just vanished. There was no longer a goal to work towards. Do I stop running? I considered that. But then I thought, well, through this small training arc I had, I discovered I kind of liked it. And that enough was a reason to continue. And I did continue. I discovered I had the intrinsic motivation to keep running. And that was so nice to know. Now, I don't know you very well, so I can't say how you'd apply this to your own situation. But one thing to think about is, am I doing this for myself, or is it because something else is attracting me to it? And there's no issue with either. It's okay to chase goals, and it's okay to do it just because you want to. But knowing that helps you make smart decisions. And if you want to, you can balance the two. Some people are happy to chase money, status, or good grades, even if the activity that gets them there is not that fun. But it doesn't matter because the end result fulfills them. And for them, that's enough. The next pillar in this trifecta of meaning is one that speaks deeply to us all, and is competence. This is the raw skill, the kind that gets you from A to B, and the kind that helps you achieve a level of, output that you're satisfied by. It frustrates me to hear the same old platitudes of, it's okay to fail, focus on the journey, take it step by step. Because while they're all true, it's only half the story. You'll see what I mean with this. When I studied in Ireland, which was only a few months ago now, I had a housemate and a friend who studied a musical theatre course, and he worked like a maniac. For weeks at a time, he would leave the house at 7 a.m. and only return at 10 or 11 in the evening. And only then did he get the chance to sit down, relax and eat a bit. And sometimes after these tiring days full of song and dance, he'd come home, start preparing his food, and then with zero notice get a text message saying, "We have a rehearsal in 20 minutes, be there." And he'd have to run out the door and leave the cooking to someone else. It was that bad sometimes. I felt sorry for him sometimes, but there was also a lot of respect because I knew that he was putting in a lot of extra effort, not only because the course demanded it, but because he wanted to be the best and he wanted to excel. Some days he was hopeless, and I don't mean just frustrated, I mean truly hopeless, because sometimes he felt like despite all of the effort he was putting in, he wasn't seeing the progress he wanted, and it was just crippling him. And I remember me and my other housemates doing our best to offer some motivation and to support him. And we said all the usual crap like, it's okay to struggle, you'll get it eventually, just take it easy, take it step by step, focus on the present. And again, it's not bad advice, but for someone who has to actually deal with a burden or failure, it's not easy to hear. If anything, it's irritating. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said the same thing. He was sick of the struggle, and all it would take for him to be happy was to see some wins along the way. In musical theatre, it takes excellence to succeed, just like in many other creative fields. If you tell someone you're perfect the way you are and it's okay, they may be comforted in the moment, but it's not true. Because for them, they just want some victories. They just want to feel a sense of skill and competence, and that's what's going to make them happy. If they took that advice to heart and didn't focus on getting better, it might just lead to more failure and therefore more misery. And then it becomes this horrible cycle. Maybe the better thing to say is that you are trying your hardest and that is brilliant, but something's missing. What is it? Let's fix it. Let's practice a skill. Let's improve on this. Let's change something so that you can get the outcome you're looking for and that you can feel confident in your abilities. That's competence. That's the joy of being damn good at what you do. I'm not saying this is the rule or that you have to be a master in everything you do, but we want to be good at something at least. And this feeling isn't just a new trend from hustle culture. It's actually rooted deep within our humanity. Back when we were hunter-gatherers, which is most of our history, we had no choice but to work together. We didn't have hobbies in the modern sense where, you come home from your day job and you do something to unwind. But our hobbies were essential activities that kept the tribe alive. We needed good hunters, we needed good foragers, we needed craftsmen, we needed people who were strong leaders, and everything in between. To be skilled was a matter of life and death, and you were expected to contribute somehow. If all you did was sit there, complain, and eat the food that someone else had hunted, you'd probably be beaten up and kicked out, and then starved to death. Even if you were disabled in some way and you couldn't help in the hunt, for example, there were still ways you could contribute to the tribe. Maybe you were great at making arrows, or maybe you knew all the best foraging spots, or maybe you just prepared the food better than anyone else did, and that's why people loved you and cared for you. Or maybe you were just a nice person and people liked you. And for humans who are compassionate, that could be enough. So skill comes in many forms, and they're all important. But then how can you take this principle and apply it to today to make your hobbies meaningful in the present? I have a pretty broad range of interests, and I'm not an expert in anything, but I have at least had some experience in managing the difficulty, dealing with setbacks, and making it so that I experience some wins every now and then, and I'm not just beating myself up every day. The first trait is so important that even the Bible stresses it. We all need humility. If you play the violin, then you know what this is. It's a shoulder rest. And I don't have mine to show you, but I only bought it recently, maybe a few months ago. You attach it to the bottom of your instrument, and it makes playing the violin so much more comfortable, enough that pretty much all violinists will consider it essential. I've been playing the violin on and off since 2019, and throughout that whole period, until recently, I didn't have a shoulder rest. And it wasn't because I couldn't afford it or anything. I was just stubborn. I told myself, yeah, I don't need that. I'll learn to do it the old-fashioned way. I'll learn to become good without one. I was bullshitting myself, because as soon as I bought it and tried it for myself, I realized just because of my pride, I had put a pointless burden on myself for that many years. And it was just dumb. And if that sounds like something you would do, don't beat yourself up, because challenging yourself is good and it shows you have spirit, but you can easily take it too far, enough that it makes your interests a pain. The simple fix to that is to know that you have your limits. At any skill level, no matter how good you are, you're going to need help from someone. And yes, some of us are better at learning independently than others, but still, we can't do this on our own. And we have to have the humility to at least recognize that. So I would look for videos, clubs, communities, resources, anything to help me on the way, because I'm a student, and any source of experience from someone else who has done what I want to do is golden. Another tip I have is to balance the difficulty of the hobby. And if you can do this well, then you will make your interests almost as addicting as a video game. And speaking of video games, they are a perfect way to show this off. Let's say you pick up Skyrim and put it to the easiest difficulty. Well, now there is no enemy that can stop you. Even the most deadly creature is no match for you. And it might be fun for an hour or two to go through the game and destroy everything, but eventually it gets boring. And there's no challenge, there's nothing to engage you, so you stop playing. But let's say you crank the difficulty up to the max. Now you have a challenge, but now you're in trouble. Because even with good armor, every enemy is dangerous to you. And you find that your weapons do nothing against them, just a scratch, and it's extremely difficult to get through anything. The game becomes almost unplayable, and the only way to win is if you perfect every move or use cheap tactics. Some people like that. Maybe they're masochists, I don't know. But I prefer middle ground. I want the game to be hard enough to challenge me and to keep me on my toes, but not to the point where it's just a torture session. Your hobbies are like this too. There's a middle ground that's hard enough to be stimulating, but not too hard that it's discouraging you. So then I'd ask you, are you biting off more than you can chew? Are you sacrificing all your willpower in this pursuit of mastery? Or are you maybe sticking with the easy stuff because you're too afraid to move on to the more difficult? It's a question worth thinking about, because it's easy for us to push too hard and then crash and burn. Since we're speaking about video games, they actually hold a lot more wisdom when it comes to motivation and making something meaningful. After all, why are they so addictive? Why are we willing to work and to struggle in a video game, but when we do that same stuff in real life, it's tedious or frustrating? Well, one major difference between the two is the feedback, and this is such an important idea. Let's take Dark Souls, for example, which, if you don't know, is a notoriously difficult game. In that game, you can spend hours dying to the same boss over and over again because it's so challenging. So then why, even though it's hard, are people willing to continue? Every time you die to this boss, you learn something. You might memorize the attack patterns, or you learn to get the timing right, or you fix some of these sloppy mistakes you're making. And every time you correct a mistake, it's rewarding. You get a little bit further in the fight each time. And even though it's challenging, you know what to do and you know what you have to do in order to get the big win, which is even more satisfying. If you push hard enough, you are guaranteed to win. But real life is harsh. It's not like a video game. So the feedback is often unclear, delayed, or non-existent. So there's many occasions where you have no idea what you're doing wrong and you don't know what to do to fix it. You don't know what the next step is. And that can be so frustrating. Late feedback happens when the end result of your work takes a long time to show itself. For example, I spend many hours working on these videos, but I don't know how well they're going to do until a week or two later. It's only once I can read your opinions and see the stats that I know what went well and what didn't. Or for another example, let's say you go to a boxing club every Friday and you learn something new. And then on Saturday, the next day, you practice your jab technique at home. Now that's good, but you have no real way of knowing what you're doing correctly. Maybe you're making some new mistake, or maybe you're doing something well and you don't know that. You can only know a week later when you show your coach in person so that he can give you some pointers and feedback on ways to improve. Now, that's delayed feedback. And I get it, it's unavoidable sometimes. But if we want to keep our interests motivated, then it's good to reduce that gap so that we can see the result of our actions quickly. If you saw your coach every day, that means you would get feedback way more often. And not only would that help you improve faster, but you'd have a clear path to progress. And that's motivating for some. But what happens if the feedback is unclear? Well, not only is that annoying, but it's probably even more dangerous for your fulfillment as well. Let's say you went to see your boxing coach 4 times a week now, but this time he gives you vague and contradicting advice. Okay, sure, the time delay is smaller, but you're frustrated because every time you go home and practice, you don't know what to do, and you don't trust his advice to give you the outcome you want. If you have a hobby and a good teacher, then you're sorted. All you have to do is act on their advice and show up. But most of us don't do that. Most of us have more personal hobbies that happen, within our house or on our own. Or maybe we can't afford teachers. I know I can't. So what do we do then? Now, it feels weird to give advice that is this obvious, but my past self could have used it. One of the best things you can do is to troubleshoot your mistakes. And I'm thinking like, yeah, no shit, but I didn't do that before. When some people make a mistake, they don't always address it. They play guessing games or they repeat the same exact process again and then make the same exact mistakes again. And that just leads to this cycle of defeat and sadness. I remember when I first started to take my cooking more seriously. Now, of course, I'd mess up dishes all the time, but instead of doing anything about it, I would just get annoyed and try the same exact thing the next week, and then it would fail again. Nowadays, I'm much more comfortable to say, well, why did this go wrong? Why did my steak not sear? Why is there so much water in the pan? Or why did my sauce split while I was making it? It's a tiny, tiny effort, but it's easy for us to forget that we have all of the information in the world at our disposal, and it's there for us to use. But I'll admit it's not always realistic. Google doesn't know what went wrong half the time, and it can only really help you with some of the more common issues. So how do you get advice that is tailor-fit to you, to your specific situation, and not someone else's on the internet? Well, there's 3 main sources I can think of. The first involves filming yourself. Now, of course, this only applies to movement-based hobbies, because you're not going to learn much if you put a camera up in your room and film yourself code. But believe me, if you see yourself from a third-person perspective, it opens your eyes to the reality. Because it's hard to judge how well we're doing when, we can't see ourselves doing it. For example, one day I decided to film myself play the violin, just out of curiosity. And to say the least, that was a wake-up call. It didn't sound as good as I thought I did. But at the very least, I saw that I was making some bowing mistakes. And I could sense that I was putting too much pressure and not keeping the angle consistent. And that was something I didn't see from, the first person perspective. And it was really valuable. It's also how I learned that my squat technique was flawed. I decided to film myself doing some reps from the side. And when I checked the video, I made a disturbing discovery. I had butt wink. And if you don't know, this is when you go too low and your hips rotate inwards at the bottom of the rep. And this is probably due to some inflexibility somewhere. But I had no idea that was the case until I filmed myself. And not only did that help me improve my technique, but it potentially saved me from a pretty bad injury down the road. All of these insights came from just a few tiny videos. And you may not have access to a teacher, but you can at least be your own teacher and give yourself that external perspective and feedback. The second source is a step up from there, and it's the internet. Maybe filming yourself is impossible or just straight up useless for you. And even if it is useful, it has its flaws. What if you don't know what to look for? Or maybe you find it hard to be honest with yourself, which is a very real concern. In that case, you might go online and speak to people who are on that same path as you. Now, the internet is a rich source of skill in itself, but it's also a good place to find feedback, and the kind of feedback that you'd have never thought of otherwise. Maybe you post some of your writing, or you share some paintings, or a video of your golf swing, for example. Could be anything. And you publish these so that people can not only enjoy them, but give you some pointers and feedback and help you see things that you're not seeing. Not everyone is nice, and not everyone will give you some useful tip. But the point is, it gives you some extra clarity in your journey, and that lifts a huge burden off your shoulders. So wherever you share your work, whether it's for a small forum or the entire world to see, you're being brave and saying, I'm a student, this is my work, how can I improve it? The third and final form of feedback is the teacher, because eventually you might be able to get the money or the time to find someone to show you how to get better. It's hard to beat a wise and patient teacher who sits down next to you and shows you exactly what you need to do to achieve the best you can. I won't dwell on this because it's very specific to each hobby. Some are one-on-one sessions, some have group sessions or online coaching or online courses even, but the point is any source of information from a real living, breathing expert is a great thing. And I say that, but they don't have to be experts either. Sometimes the most relevant and thoughtful advice comes from someone who is your skill level, someone who's next to you on the same path. All of this feedback makes you competent. It puts the power back into your hands and gives you the skill you need to say, I am good at what I do, and this hobby is meaningful to me. And since we're on the topic of feedback, I like to quickly plug my newsletter. If you sign up with the link down below, you'll get weekly articles on reading, writing, and overall building a creative life that you can be proud of. There's also a lot of topics we don't talk about on the channel, so be sure to sign up. It's totally free and I'll see you there. The third pillar of a meaningful life is relatedness. And this is the need to feel connected to other people, but also to care for them in a way. There are exceptions, but this whole idea you see of the lone wolf is not only destructive, but it's kind of baseless too. In nature, lone wolves starve to death, and humans are no different. For our entire history, we've relied on each other for care, for support, and for survival. It's only recently that we can live almost our entire life without any human interaction. We can work from home, we can order our food, and we can do all of our hobbies alone, within the confines of our own walls. But is that a recipe for a healthy life? Sure, we have all the time in the world to practice our interests, but is that worth the loneliness and the disorder that it causes? I don't think so. There has to be a balance. Yes, a fulfilling life of learning, but we have to somehow intertwine that with a sense of belonging as well. But that's just half the definition. What about this odd phrase that stuck to the end of it? Well, humans are tribal by nature, and much of our behavior is driven by altruism. Anything that helps the group helps not only our friends and family, but also us. And that's probably why giving feels so good, and why we feel warm inside when we can belong to a community. It's why loneliness and rejection guts us from the inside. That's our mind telling us so desperately to find peace with our people. But let's slow down for a second. How is this relevant to any of your hobbies? Well, some of the most rewarding experiences I've had in any of my hobbies are when I've been able to show someone else how to do the same thing. I'm not sure what it is, but when someone shares the interest in a hobby that I also have, it makes me happy. And to know that I have something to offer them in their journey is the best feeling. And I know it's not just me. I know that you also love to talk about the hobbies that mean something to you. In the last few points, you were the student, but maybe becoming a teacher is your ticket to fulfillment and true connection with other people. But this is not the rule. You don't have to help anyone with your hobbies, like it's a charity. And at the end of the day, you might just want something for yourself, which is totally fair. In that case, you can still feel a sense of connection just by belonging to a group that shares this interest with you. For example, my relationship with the violin is rocky. Sure, I enjoy playing it, but a lot of the time it's so difficult that I just end up hating it. And I finish the practice session with my self-esteem at rock bottom. And I remember during one particularly dry spell of motivation, I watched a video by Two Set Violin. And if you don't know, these are a pair on YouTube of really famous and talented musicians. And just seeing them play uplifted me. I forgot how much I enjoyed the violin. And I remembered that I wasn't alone in this interest. Other people were struggling. Other people were producing great things. And seeing them play and seeing their passion inspired me to grow and to become better. When you're alone and struggling, it's easy to forget just how brilliant this interest is. Sometimes the negative parts overshadow everything, and it just feels hopeless. So maybe all it takes for you to reignite this love for your hobby is to make it public, so that you can see other people excelling and so that people can see your work. And it fills you with this sort of mutual motivation to continue and to achieve great things. The Renaissance happened when great writers, thinkers, and artists came together in Florence. Because they were close to each other, they could compete, they could share their work. Overall, they created the perfect conditions for creative excellence to come out of it. And speaking of competition, that's an underrated way to propel yourself forward. Of all the guru one-liners that you hear parroted around online, I think my least favorite is, you should never compare yourself to others. Now that's used in many different ways, and there's many different interpretations, and I do agree with some of them, but some interpretations are short-sighted or just unrealistic. Should you feel inadequate just because someone else is ahead of you? Of course not, that's destructive. Should you focus on your next step no matter where you are along the path? Yeah, of course, that's great. But I hate to see this phrase being used to discourage competition as a whole. Because it's good to set yourself a high standard. It's good to chase an ideal. And it's even better to engage in some healthy rivalry with other people. All the times I felt the most motivated for getting in the gym, for reading, for writing, are the times where I've met or seen someone who's ahead of me. And it makes me think like, shit, I want to get to their level. I want to achieve what they've achieved, and I have so much work to do, and I'm excited to get started. It's truly like a fire has been lit inside you. And I know it's only temporary, but it's good to have this undercurrent of rivalry to keep you sharp and to keep you focused. Now, not everyone's the competitive type. And just like everything else in this video, I'm not prescribing you a list of rules you have to follow. But let's also not pretend that it's a bad thing or that competition is somehow something to be avoided. I'd even go as far as saying it's a core of our humanity itself. We are hierarchical by nature. No matter which room we're standing in, we are consciously or subconsciously weighing ourselves up against other people. And our hobbies are no different. Whether it's board games night, whether it's sparring in a gym, or the evening debate club, there are the more skilled and there are the less skilled. And we want to be up here. Even if you show up just for some casual fun, you still want to be good at it, because why wouldn't you? And I want to stress that this competition doesn't have to be bitter or toxic. I'm not defending the, Sigma lone wolf, I must beat everyone mindset. But I just want you to know that it's okay to strive and to compete. So maybe if you feel your motivation dwindling, it could be time to find a community to not only get advice and support from, but also to find some opportunities for healthy rivalry, the kind that will push you and your friends to new heights. And those are the 3 pillars of a meaningful life that we can apply to our hobbies. It was a long video and I could have talked for a lot longer. And I'm certain that I missed a lot of good points. So my email is open, the comments are open. I love to hear what you have, how you've struggled with this maybe in the past, or how you've applied something to make it feel more meaningful to you and fulfilling. So feel free to send me a message. I read them all. I might take a while to respond sometimes, but I do read and reply to everything. So thank you for watching.